Heavy snow hammered down across the frozen wetlands, each flake adding another layer to the dangerous expanse of wilderness. Ice cracked under their boots with every step, showing dark water underneath, ready to swallow anyone who broke through. Sergeant Lyra Vale grabbed onto a frost-covered pine tree, bracing herself as another blast of Arctic wind ripped through the forest. Her 8-person squad had been marching through this hellish landscape for 6 hours straight, and it had gotten 10 degrees colder since they crossed the river at sunrise. Her breath came out in white puffs that turned to ice crystals against her scarf. Behind her, the rest of the team pushed through thigh-deep snow, their body heat barely showing through the wall of falling ice. "Whoever sent us through this mess is insane," Corporal Damon Wells grumbled, his voice fighting the wind. He was their comms tech. "This storm just keeps getting worse." Lieutenant Rowan Creed, leading the squad, threw up his fist, the stop signal. Everyone froze instantly, weapons up, eyes searching the white emptiness around them. Lyra dropped to one knee, her custom rifle already at her shoulder, scope scanning the tree line. Years of drills had carved this motion into pure instinct. "Something's off," Creed said quietly into his radio. "Too still." Lyra knew exactly what he meant. Even in deep winter, a marsh this big should have some life to it. Wind through the reeds, ice settling, birds in the distance. This silence felt planned, artificial, like the land was holding its breath. She'd earned her spot in this elite squad 3 years back after nailing a moving target at 1,800 meters during a sandstorm in training. The instructors said it couldn't be done. Lyra proved them wrong. But her reputation came with baggage. People said she was cold, disconnected, more robot than human. They said she had no fear, which made her dangerous to work with. What they didn't know was that Lyra felt everything. She just refused to show it. 2 years ago, she'd made a mistake. A rushed shot, misjudged wind. Her spotter got exposed when she fired too early. The enemy spotted their position from the muzzle flash. He died pushing her out of the line of fire, taking 3 bullets meant for her. After that, Lyra worked solo. No spotter, no partner, just her rifle and cold calculations. "Make camp," Creed ordered, pointing to some pine trees that offered weak cover. "We move at 0400. Stay sharp." The squad spread out smoothly. Lyra picked a spot 40 meters from camp where she could watch the approaches. She cleared snow under an evergreen branch, making a small hide that blocked her heat signature but kept her sight lines open. When night fell, she ran through her nightly routine, checking every piece of her rifle, running her fingers along the barrel, adjusting the scope. The weapon was custom-built, chambered in .338 Lapua Magnum, accurate at distances most snipers thought were impossible. Around 10 at night, Lyra caught something, a quick flash of light, too sharp to be natural, about 800 meters northeast. She filed it away mentally but didn't call it in yet. Could have been ice reflecting moonlight. Could have been something else. An hour later, she heard it. A soft metallic tap, like gear hitting steel. Then another quiet sound. Boots on frozen ground. But the pace was wrong for anyone in her squad. Lyra double-tapped her radio, silent warning. In camp, Creed's head snapped toward her. She pointed northeast, held up 8 fingers, then drew a slow circle. 8 hostiles surrounding them. Creed moved fast but calm, waking the squad and shifting them into defensive positions without making it obvious. But Lyra knew they were already too late. The tracks in the snow around them were old, buried by new storms. Whoever was tracking them had been watching for miles, waiting for the perfect moment. The attack would come at dawn. The strike hit at 5:47. In that gray space before sunrise when everything blurs together. Lyra was already awake, had been for hours, watching the tree line through her thermal scope. When the first drone showed up, it hovered low, almost silent, just above the marsh grass 300 meters out. A Recon drone, civilian model but modified. Their pursuers had money and training. She reached for her radio when all hell broke loose. Smoke grenades popped from 3 directions at once, creating a thick wall of haze that blinded their thermal gear. Through the swirling gray, Lyra heard the sharp crack of rifle fire, not wild spraying, but measured shots from trained operators. Contact! Wells yelled, his voice nearly drowned out by explosions. Lyra rolled left as round, shredded pine branches above her, spraying her with ice and bark. She crawled toward a fallen log, rifle pressed to her chest, her mind already calculating angles and distances as chaos erupted around her. Through gaps in the smoke, she saw the assault. More than 20 attackers moving in coordinated fire teams, advancing with skills that screamed professional training. No unit patches, but their gear was top tier. Night optics, body armor, suppressed rifles. Her squad fought back hard, but they were outnumbered and pinned in a kill zone. Creed barked orders, trying to organize a withdrawal to higher ground, but the smoke killed visibility. The enemy was too close. Lyra found cover behind the log and locked onto her first target, a squad leader making hand signals to his team. She centered her crosshays, breathed out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked hard. Through the scope, she watched him drop. But for every hostile she took down, 3 more appeared. Their tactics were textbook. She recognized Russian Special Forces methods adapted for irregular warfare. An explosion to her left shook the ground, a grenade detonating close enough that the shockwave hit her like a truck. Her ears screamed. Her vision swam. She tasted blood. She'd bitten through her tongue. Through the dizziness, she heard Wells on the radio. "They're everywhere. We can't." The signal died. Lyra wiped blood from her eye and raised her scope again. What she saw made her stomach drop. The smoke was clearing, and her squad's defense was collapsing. Not wiped out, captured. The attackers were using controlled, non-lethal tactics where possible, trying to incapacitate instead of kill. They wanted prisoners. She watched Rowan forced to his knees, hands zip-tied behind him. Wells lay unconscious, being dragged to a staging point. The others, Martinez, Cooper, Hayes, Sullivan, Park, were getting pinned and restrained one by one. Lyra pushed forward to help when the marsh beneath her gave way. The ice, weakened by her body heat and grenade concussions, shattered like glass. She plunged into black water so cold it ripped the air from her lungs, shooting pain through every nerve. The pool was only 4 feet deep, but thick mud at the bottom grabbed her legs like a trap. She clawed upward, gasping, miraculously still gripping her rifle. The fallen log above had shifted, creating a crude shelter of branches and ice that hid her from view. Overhead, muffled voices drifted through the frozen air, speaking English with accents. Boots scraped across the brittle surface. 8 detainees secured. Moving to extraction. Confirmed. Rally at Echo 7. Transport in 20 minutes. Their footsteps faded. Then only wind through frozen reeds and Lyra's ragged breathing. She was the only one not captured. She was also soaked in sub-zero temperatures with no support and no comms. The enemy now had Wellesley's gear. Lyra hauled herself from the water, moving with mechanical discipline. Hypothermia would kill her within an hour if she didn't get warm. But she didn't have time for that luxury. She'd watched her entire team disappear into the morning haze, and she was the only one who could bring them back. Her fingers were blue by the time she peeled off her soaked layers. She shook so hard it took 3 tries to unzip her pack and pull out an emergency thermal blanket. Hypothermia wasn't just cold. It was a quiet killer creeping closer with every shiver. She found a hollow under massive pine where the branches formed a natural windbreak. The ground was dry, cushioned with old brown needles. Wrapping herself in the thermal blanket, she forced controlled breaths until her core temperature stopped dropping. The marsh stretched around her like a frozen graveyard, beautiful and deadly. Every crack of shifting ice, every whisper of wind could mean discovery or death. But worse than the cold or the enemy was the silence, the absence of her squad's voices, the knowledge that 8 teammates who trusted her were now prisoners because she hadn't caught the ambush soon enough. Her former spotter's face flashed in her mind, the moment he'd pushed her clear, knowing he wouldn't survive. She'd failed him then. Now she'd failed her squad. Stop. Not now. Focus. Lyra pulled out her personal optics, a high-end thermal monocular she'd bought herself, compact enough to survive the plunge. She swept the marsh in careful arcs. There, 2 kilometers northeast. Heat signatures. Multiple figures in tight formation, moving in a tactical column. That had to be the enemy escort with her captured squad. They were heading deeper into hostile territory, toward what she assumed was their base of operations. She checked her rifle. It was functional. Military rifles were built to fire after getting wet, though she really needed to strip it down for any precision work. That would cost time she didn't have. Her squad would be interrogated, probably Weiss. Every minute cut their survival chances. Lyra weighed her options with brutal clarity. She could try reaching friendly lines, report the situation, wait for a recovery mission that might take days to organize. By then, her squad would be dead or moved somewhere impossible to track. Or she could do what she was built for: hunt. The marsh was hostile, but it was also cover. The enemy wouldn't expect a lone survivor to stalk them through this frozen wasteland. They'd be focused on moving fast, securing prisoners before command realized her squad had missed check-in. Lyra gave herself 10 minutes to prep. She worked with practiced efficiency, breaking down her rifle, clearing each part, reassembling it with hands that no longer trembled. She changed into her last dry underlayer, trading warmth for mobility. Ammo count: 32 rounds of .338 Lapua Magnum against 20-plus hostile operators. The math sucked, but math had never stopped her before. She began her pursuit, moving through the marsh with the patience of someone who knew that rushing without stealth just meant dying faster. The enemy left a trail: boot marks, broken ice, bent reeds. They were moving quickly, trading stealth for speed, confident no one would dare follow them through this frozen hell. They were wrong. 90 minutes later, Lyra reached a vantage point, a jagged rock outcrop rising 50 meters above the marsh. Exposed, wind-blasted, a nightmare position for any sniper. The gusts here were wild, swirling, unpredictable, but it was the only spot within 3 kilometers offering a clear view of where the enemy was taking her squad. Through her scope at maximum magnification, she saw it, a cleared area near an old ranger station, repurposed into a temporary holding site. Her team was locked in what looked like a reinforced storage building. Guards patrolled the perimeter, others gathered by vehicles. Lyra pulled her rangefinder. 2,897 meters. Nearly 3 kilometers. She'd made shots at 2,200 before. The longest recorded sniper kill in history was just past 3,500 meters, under perfect conditions with multiple spotters and support. Lyra had none of that. She had vicious crosswinds, steady snowfall, sub-zero air that would mess with her ballistics, and a squad that would die if she hesitated. She began her calculations. At this range, her bullet would take roughly 4 seconds to reach the target. It would drop nearly 30 meters from the barrel line. A 5-mile-per-hour wind would push the shot more than a meter sideways. And the wind here wasn't a gentle 5. It whipped erratically between 15 and 30, changing directions constantly. Any military manual would call this shot impossible. Lyra had learned long ago that impossible just meant no one had succeeded yet. She began building her firing position. Her hands were bare. Despite the biting cold, she needed pure tactile feedback. The feel of the stone, the vibration of the gusts, the micro-adjustments of where her rifle would rest. Gloves dulled too much, and at 2,900 meters, even the tiniest variable meant failure. She stacked stones carefully, creating a platform that would absorb recoil without shifting. The rifle had to be perfectly level, perfectly supported. Even a fraction of a degree would send her round into empty snow valleys away. Next came the real battle: wind. At normal combat distances, wind was just another factor. At 3 kilometers, wind was everything, and wind was never uniform. It changed with terrain, altitude, temperature. Lyra opened a small weathered notebook and started logging conditions. She watched falling snow, mapping the curves of each swirl. She studied trees at different elevations, noting how their branches moved at different rhythms. Most snipers used wind meters and ballistic computers. Lyra used her senses and a trick she'd learned from an old Marine sniper who'd fought in Vietnam. She pulled several strands of her own hair, holding them up to feel how they drifted. Hair caught currents that instruments sometimes missed. She tied the strands to tiny stones and placed them around her platform, forming a primitive but highly sensitive wind indicator system. Then she breathed, slow, measured, deliberate, lowering her heart rate into the mental state she called the quiet. Her pulse dropped from 60 to 50 to 45. The world slowed, sounds flattening, vision sharpening into cold precision. This was a trance state only elite marksmen reached, a fusion of mind and muscle that looked like instinct but was born from 10,000 hours of repetition. Her heartbeat leveled at 44 beats per minute. Perfect. Through her scope, she studied the ranger station carefully. Guards rotated on a 15-minute cycle, standard discipline. The prisoners were kept in the main structure, briefly visible whenever the door opened. She counted heads. All 8 members of her squad were alive. But a new problem emerged. The shots she needed weren't just difficult, they required precise sequencing. She had to neutralize the immediate threats to her team, which meant identifying who held command, who had weapons trained on her people, who would shoot the moment chaos started. At 2,900 meters, she couldn't make out faces, but she could read posture, authority, the subtle way others yielded space around certain figures. There, in the compound center, a man directing movements with sharp gestures. That was the commander. If she dropped him first, the shock might buy her people precious seconds to fight back. But another presence intruded, as it always did before a critical shot. Her former spotter's voice, steady in her memory, calling wind adjustments with calm precision. Back then, she'd had someone to catch what she missed, to validate her calculations, to share the weight of taking a life from impossible distance. Now she had no one. Lyra opened her ballistic log and began computing. Bullet drop at 2,900 meters with her load, 29.7 meters. Coriolis drift. Earth's rotation would nudge her round approximately 8 centimeters right at this latitude. Temperature at minus 15 Celsius would slow muzzle velocity by roughly 20 feet per second. She worked through every value with mechanical precision, checking and rechecking. Then she adjusted her scope, dialing elevation and windage according to her best calculations. Wind remained the only truly unpredictable variable. It would shift during the bullet's 4-second flight. She had to trust instinct to bridge that uncertainty. Movement flickered at the station. Guards were lining the prisoners outside. Wrong. Why expose them now? Unless they were prepping for transport or execution. Lyra's pulse kicked hard, threatening the calm she needed. She inhaled deeply, crushing the panic. Emotion now meant failure. She had one chance. 4 seconds of flight. Almost 3 kilometers of unknowns. 8 lives depending on the hardest shot she'd ever attempted. She settled prone, cheek pressed against the stock, centered through the optic. Her trigger finger rested lightly, feeling the faint tension of the mechanism. The world collapsed into a single narrow corridor of pure focus. Then, impossibly, the wind died. Absolute silence. No gusts, no drifting snow, just a crystalline pause draped across the marsh. Lyra recognized these moments. Brief atmospheric still points where everything held its breath. She had 4 seconds, 5 at most. Through maximum magnification, her target sharpened. The commander, standing square in the compound, gesturing at the prisoners being lined along a wall. The stance, the motions, she'd seen firing line preparations before. Her crosshairs settled on center mass. At 2,900 meters, a headshot would be reckless fantasy. The torso was the only viable target zone, though viable was relative when the target looked no bigger than a fingernail. She'd solved every equation possible. Now came the part math could never own. The difference between a competent marksman and an extraordinary one. Intuition. Lyra exhaled slowly, emptying her lungs until she reached that tiny weightless moment between breaths when her body went absolutely still. One heartbeat pulsed, slow, controlled. She pressed the trigger. The rifle thundered, recoil slamming her shoulder, muzzle blast cracking off the stone. She held her eye to the scope. 1 second. The round still climbing, rising toward its peak. 2 seconds. Reaching maximum altitude, beginning its long fall, still screaming at over 2,200 feet per second. 3 seconds. Dropping hard now, dragged by gravity, carving a path through frigid air. 4 seconds. The commander collapsed like his strings had been cut. For a heartbeat, the compound froze, confused. They didn't understand what had happened. The rifle's report wouldn't reach them for another 3 full seconds, and even then, the echo would smear across the marsh, impossible to pinpoint. A guard stared at the fallen officer. Another pivoted, scanning aimlessly. Then the sound arrived, a distant crack from everywhere and nowhere, and panic erupted. Lyra had already cycled her bolt, chambering a second round. She'd built her plan around this window. The brief confusion before trained soldiers reorganized. They'd dive for cover, search for angles, but she still had seconds to exploit. Her next target, the guard nearest Rowan Creed, the one leveling his rifle at the prisoners. Through the scope, she watched him twist, still trying to process the chaos. She fired again. Another 4-second eternity. Another impossible calculation, made in the quiet space between heartbeats. The guard dropped. Now the compound erupted in full panic. Soldiers scattered. Some dove for cover. Others tried dragging prisoners back inside. But 3 of them, Martinez, Cooper, and Hayes, had seized the opening. She watched them bolt, grabbing weapons and sprinting for freedom. Lyra shifted, tracking a new threat, an enemy soldier who'd found partial cover and was aiming at the fleeing prisoners. She led him by a fraction, compensating for his movement, and took the shot. Miss. The wind had nudged her round just enough to push it off course. She racked the bolt, chambered again. The soldier was still aiming. She corrected. Fired. He dropped. 4 rounds fired. 3 hits at 2,900 meters. Numbers that would seem mythical to anyone who didn't know that impossible was just another word for difficult. But the enemy was adapting. She spotted a team assembling a heavy machine gun, angling it toward her general direction. They couldn't see her, too distant, too well hidden, but they were going to rake the high ground with suppressive fire. The first bow sent rounds snapping past her position, stitching stone 50 meters to her left. Guesswork, but even guesses could kill. Lyra took one final shot. She aimed at a fuel truck she'd marked earlier as a contingency target. The .338 Lapua round wasn't incendiary, but at this range, it would punch cleanly through the tank's thin casing. The explosion blossomed into a rolling fireball, hurling soldiers into cover and drowning the compound in thick smoke. In that confusion, her squad surged. She watched Rowan lead the remaining prisoners through the haze in a coordinated escape, slipping toward the marsh and its maze of frozen waterways, terrain that could make them nearly impossible to track. Her part was done. Now came the harder task: stay alive long enough to rejoin them. Because the enemy was hunting her now. She saw them assembling a pursuit element, grabbing winter gear and weapons. They knew the general direction of her shots, and they were furious. Lyra collapsed her shooting position fast, hands moving efficiently. The exposed outcrop that had served as a perfect sniper perch was now a death trap. She had 10 minutes at best. Time to disappear. She descended the rock face carefully, testing each foothold before shifting weight. A fall now meant broken bones and death. She made it about 30 meters down when the first round smacked into the stone above her. The pursuers had thermal optics, enough to detect her residual heat signature. They were still too far for accuracy, maybe 800 meters, but closing fast. She dropped the last 3 meters into deep snow that cushioned her landing but slowed her movement. The marsh ahead was a labyrinth of hidden shelves and pockets of open water. She knew the terrain. They didn't. That bought her time. Just not much. Lyra veered laterally instead of fleeing straight away. Most people ran directly from danger. She moved perpendicular, heading toward broken ice and scattered water channels. Treacherous ground that punished mistakes. Treacherous for everyone. She reached an ice field and paused, studying it. Darker patches meant thin ice or open water. Pale areas were likely solid. Likely. Her weight might hold with careful distribution. The enemy charging blindly wouldn't be so precise. She stepped onto the ice, easing her weight into each shift. Behind her came shouting. Her hunters had reached the ice edge and were arguing about how to proceed. One chose impatience. She heard the crack, the splash, the frantic yelling as freezing water swallowed him. One down by his own momentum, the rest would move cautiously now. Slower. Good. Lyra reached stable ground on the far side and immediately sought advantage. Every minute she created was another minute her squad widened their lead. She settled behind a fallen trunk, set her rifle, and waited. 4 soldiers were picking their way across the ice. Tense, weapons ready, moving in careful tactical bounds. Skilled, disciplined, dangerous. She selected the point man, the one the others were following, trusting his judgment. She didn't aim at him. She aimed at the ice directly ahead of him. The .338 round shattered the surface in a violent burst of shards. He recoiled instinctively, weight shifting backward. The ice beneath him fractured like brittle glass and dropped him straight through. The remaining 3 froze, suddenly aware that the field beneath them had become a death trap. They couldn't advance without risking collapse. They couldn't retreat without exposing their backs to her. Lyra exploited the hesitation. She fired into the ice near the second man. Not at him, but around him, splintering the surface in warning. He scrambled backward, panic overwhelming training. Now the group was retreating, dragging their soaked teammate from the water, consumed with survival instead of pursuit. But Lyra knew this reprieve was brief. They'd regroup, find a safer route, and come for her with more bodies and better tactics. She had to reach her squad. Before moving, she pulled out her compass and oriented herself toward the direction she'd watched her team run. Northeast, deeper into the marsh, toward low hills offering stronger defensive ground. Snow thickened into heavy flakes, shrinking visibility but conveniently masking her trail. She traveled with purpose, using game paths where she found them, using ridges and terrain folds to blur her heat signature from aerial sensors. After 40 minutes of punishing movement, she spotted them. A line of fresh boot prints, 8 sets, moving in disciplined tactical spacing. Her squad was together, organized, thinking like soldiers even after captivity. Good. She accelerated, closing the distance now that she knew their heading. Lyra found them 3 kilometers northeast of the station, tucked inside a natural depression ringed by dense pines. They'd chosen well, solid sight lines, overhead protection, multiple exits. She announced herself before stepping into their perimeter, using the daily password to avoid a nervous trigger pull. Rowan Creed's expression broke into pure relief as she emerged from the whiteout like a ghost. "Sergeant Vale," he breathed, gripping her arm. That was one hell of a rescue. The squad looked battered. Martinez's ankle was badly sprained from their escape. Cooper had taken a glancing round to the shoulder. Not fatal, but painful. All of them showed varying degrees of hypothermia and exhaustion. "We need to move," Lyra said immediately. "They are reorganizing. We've got maybe 30 minutes. Martinez can't keep pace," Wells said, supporting the injured man. "Cooper's barely hanging on." "Then we make them pay for every meter they take from us," Creed decided. "Vale, you're our strongest asset now. What do you need?" "Time to set defensive positions along our route," Lyra replied. "If I can slow them down, pick off their lead elements, we might reach the extraction point." The extraction point was a clearing 6 kilometers north where a helicopter might land, if they could raise comms, and if the weather cooperated. Both were questionable. They pressed forward with Lyra moving ahead as forward scout. Every few hundred meters she found an overlook to watch their back trail, waiting for pursuit to appear and engaging when necessary. The enemy was careful now, stung by earlier losses, but still relentless. Through her scope, she saw them sweeping forward in an extended line using proper spacing. She let them reach 600 meters, then dropped their point man. The attackers immediately dove flat. They'd stay down for several minutes, trying to pinpoint her position before advancing again. Lyra moved before they could triangulate her location. Another 500 meters ahead. Another hide. Another shot. This time she targeted equipment. Blew out a soldier's radio pack. No kill needed. Psychological pressure worked too. The pattern repeated for nearly 2 hours. Lyra advanced, fired, relocated. Each cycle earned her squad precious time, pushing them closer to escape. But the marsh itself fought them. Their route crossed stretches of thin ice, places where water never froze fully, even in dead winter. They moved single file, testing each step, progress agonizingly slow while their pursuers crept closer. At one point, young Private Hayes, just 19, broke through the crust up to his chest. The icy shock made him gasp and thrash, only worsening his situation. Lyra reached him first, dropping flat to spread her weight, extending her rifle stock for him to grab. "Stop moving," she ordered, voice sharp as steel. "Look at me." He froze, wide-eyed. "Breathe. Spread your arms on the ice. You're not sinking. It's 4 feet deep. Feel the bottom." She saw the shift as his boots touched solid mud. "Now push with your legs and pull toward me. Slow and controlled. You're fine." It took 2 grueling minutes, but they freed him. He was soaked and trembling but alive. They wrapped him in an emergency blanket and pushed on. Stopping meant death. Near twilight, they reached a hill crowned with massive boulders. Good visibility, solid cover. The best fighting position they'd find. "Call extraction," Creed ordered. Wells pulled out a backup radio. "Static, storm interference, or jamming." "Then we hold until morning," Creed decided. "Set rotation. Veil, overwatch. Full autonomy. Engage anything you deem a threat." As darkness smothered the marsh and temperatures plunged to -20°C, Lyra settled into her nest among the rocks. Tonight would be the longest of her life. Because the enemy was still out there, and they weren't done. They hit at 2 o'clock, during the coldest hour when human alertness drops lowest. Lyra spotted them first. Thermal silhouettes threading through the trees. "Contact," she whispered into her radio. Multiple hostiles, 300 meters, advancing to assault positions. Her squad snapped awake, training overriding exhaustion. Creed had positioned them in a tight defensive ring, sectors overlapping properly, textbook doctrine. But 8 defenders against a dozen or more attackers made the math brutal. Lyra had spent the last hour planting primitive alarms along approach routes. Tripwires linked to tin cans filled with rocks, crude pressure triggers made of sticks and cord. Not to kill, just to warn, to slow. The first alarm rattled at 280 meters. A faint clatter of stones. Lyra tracked the sound, found the heat bloom, inhaled, fired. One down. The enemy flattened instantly but didn't withdraw. These were professionals who'd tasted humiliation already and wouldn't tolerate another failure. They advanced methodically under suppressive fire, using solid infantry tactics. The firefight became a rhythm of violent bursts, automatic fire flashing in the night, traces slicing through falling snow like burning insects, Lyra's rifle cracking back in steady reply while return rounds hammered the boulders shielding her. She worked her rifle with cold mechanical efficiency, choosing targets carefully, making every round matter. At these distances, 200 to 400 meters, she was lethal, and the enemy understood it. They shifted heavy suppressive fire onto her position, trying to drown her in noise while other elements maneuvered. But Lyra had learned long ago how to survive under incoming fire. You never ignored it. That was how you died. You simply learned to distinguish rounds that could kill you from rounds meant only to scare you. Most suppressive fire was just that. Noise. She dropped 3 more hostiles in rapid succession, stalling the enemy push completely. They'd expected to overwhelm a group of exhausted, half-frozen escapees. Instead, they collided with a dug-in defense anchored by a sniper who saw through darkness and didn't miss. Their acting commander, the replacement for the one she'd killed, made a call. She watched it unfold through her scope. Troops pulling back, adjusting formation, preparing a different approach. They were bringing up a marksman of their own. The first shot from the enemy sniper whipped so close she heard the supersonic crack tee past her ear. A professional. Someone trained. She rolled left instantly, slipping behind a boulder just as a second round smashed into the spot she'd occupied seconds before, spraying stone fragments across her cheek. Now the fight had changed. This was sniper versus sniper, the most intimate and unforgiving duel on any battlefield. Lyra forced herself into stillness. Think. Their marksman was using thermal optics. He'd seen her muzzle flash, tracked her shift. He'd expect her to pop up from a new angle for a counter shot. She stayed low, silent, letting the minutes stretch, letting him wonder if he'd killed her or if she was circling for a flank. Behind her, her squad kept suppressive fire flowing, pinning the enemy infantry in place. But ammo was finite, and the attackers seemed willing to trade rounds all night. After 5 long minutes, Lyra saw it. A faint thermal flicker about 400 meters out, elevated. Someone shifting weight, adjusting their rifle. She centered her reticle and waited. Snipers always moved again once they thought they'd been spotted. There, another subtle shift. Lyra fired. Through her scope, she watched the heat signature collapse. Enemy sniper down. The effect was immediate. Without their precision shooter, the enemy lost discipline. Their fire scattered. Their movements hesitated. Creed seized the opening. All sectors, suppressive fire. Push them back. Her squad unleashed everything left in their weapons. A roaring curtain of fire no sane attacker would cross. And these enemies were sane. They'd taken heavy losses for zero gain. They withdrew, dragging casualties, vanishing into the dark shade of pre-dawn. But Lyra knew this wasn't victory, merely postponement. Come daylight, the enemy would regroup, bring overwhelming force, or just call in artillery. Her squad needed extraction before sunrise. As if on cue, Wells suddenly shouted, "I've got signal." Patchy, but signal. Request immediate extraction, Creed snapped. Emergency priority. They waited in straining silence while Wells fought static, praying the connection held. Copy received. Wells called. Birds inbound. 4 to 5 minutes. Weather's clearing enough for flight. 4 to 5 minutes. They had to survive 4 to 5 minutes. The enemy would hear the helicopters long before arrival. They'd throw everything into stopping the extraction. Check ammo, Creed ordered. This is about to get ugly. Lyra had 6 rounds left in her magazine. 6 bullets between her squad and annihilation. She'd made the impossible work before. She only hoped she had a few more impossibles left. The helicopters arrived low and fast, skimming treetops, rotor wash blasting snow into swirling clouds. 2 Blackhawks, armed and ready, the door gunners already hunting for targets. The enemy launched their final assault exactly as Lyra predicted, bursting from the tree line in a desperate charge. Silhouetted against dawn, they were exposed, and her squad fought with the ferocity of soldiers who could see salvation inbound. Lyra took her last 6 shots with clinical calm, dropping 6 threats in perfect cadence, a sequence her instructors would have framed on a wall. She holstered her rifle and switched to her sidearm, firing control bursts to cover the squad as the Blackhawks touched down. "Move! Move! Move!" Creed shouted, shepherding his people toward the landing zone while enemy rounds snapped into the snow. The door gunners unleashed torrents of fire, their heavy guns finally overwhelming the assault and forcing the attackers to break. Her squad scrambled aboard. Martinez and Cooper hauled in by sheer strength. Hayes wrapped tight in his emergency blanket. Every one of them moved with the frantic urgency of soldiers who'd already accepted death only to be handed one last chance to live. Vale, move. Creed was the last man outside the helicopter, refusing to climb aboard until every member of his squad was accounted for. Lyra sprinted, legs burning from exhaustion, lungs raw from frozen air. She launched herself through the open door just as the pilot pulled pitch, lifting them free of the kill zone. Below, the marsh shrank away, a frozen graveyard she'd narrowly escaped, now just a pale wasteland scarred by dark lines of battle. She watched enemy soldiers regrouping, staring up at the departing Blackhawks, knowing they'd lost. Inside, her squad checked each other for injuries, stunned and relieved to still be breathing. Someone pressed a bottle of water into Lyra's hands. Someone else draped a blanket over her shoulders. Creed settled beside her, leaning close to be heard over the roar of the rotors. "That shot, from 3 clicks out. I didn't think it was even possible." "It wasn't," Lyra replied. "If we're being honest, statistically speaking, I should have missed. Wind was wrong. Conditions were wrong. Everything was wrong. But you made it anyway," Creed said. 3 times. 3 hits at 2,900 meters. He shook his head, half in disbelief. They're going to want a full debrief. Ballistics analysts are going to lose their minds. That might be one of the longest confirmed sniper kills ever recorded. Lyra didn't answer. She stared out the open door at the retreating marsh, thinking of her former spotter, thinking of every shot she'd missed, every mistake she'd carried like a weight. Then she glanced at the 8 people in this aircraft who were alive because she'd made 3 shots no one believed could be made. Wells leaned in, grinning through exhaustion. They're already talking about it on the command net. Silent Frost, that's what they're calling you. The Silent Frost sniper. That's stupid, Lyra muttered, though without heat. Hey, military call signs could be worse, Wells shot back. Be grateful it's not something embarrassing. As the helicopter cut through frigid air toward safety, toward heat, dry clothes, medical care, Lyra felt something shift deep inside. The burden she'd carried since her spotter's death, the guilt, the isolation, the belief that she was too dangerous to be part of a team, began to loosen. She hadn't saved him, but she had saved her squad. Sometimes redemption didn't come from rewriting the past. Sometimes it came from standing where it mattered, when it mattered, and doing the thing everyone swore couldn't be done. The sun broke through the cloud cover, bathing the snowbound wilderness in golden rose, beautiful and deadly, like everything in this land of ice. Creed touched her shoulder, nodding toward the squad. You know what you gave us back there, he said. Hope. When we were tied up in that compound, when we thought it was over, you gave us hope. Lyra looked around at them. Martinez, Cooper, Hayes, Sullivan, Park, Wells, Creed. 8 soldiers who had trusted her. 8 who still lived because she refused to accept that impossible meant unreachable. Just doing my job, sir, she said softly. No, Creed replied. You didn't just do your job. You did the impossible. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun, carrying them home, carrying them away from the frozen marsh, the silent forest, and all the places where death had stalked them. Behind them, the killing ground faded beneath a blanket of white. Ahead waited whatever came next. Somewhere between the two, Lyra Vale, the sniper once deemed too cold, too distant, had become the Silent Frost. The woman who made the impossible shot when the world demanded it. The one who stood alone in the frozen dark. The one who refused to let her squad die. The one who hit a target at 2,900 meters in a winter storm and saved 8 lives with 3 bullets and 4 seconds of stillness. In the marsh below, snowfall would bury the battlefield, covering blood, brass, broken ice, and boot prints. But the story would remain, and that story would spread through every base, every briefing room, every sniper school, told by instructors to recruits who insisted certain shots were impossible. The legend of the Silent Frost, the story of Lyra Vale, who proved impossible just meant no one had done it yet.